Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. Now, the website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Today's interview is the first of, I hope, many interviews, but it's the only interview that I've done so far with the fantastic and wonderful Lauren Kennedy. And this interview, if we had sponsors, would be brought to you by Rhodes College, a magical, magical place. I taught at Rhodes College and worked there for about 12 years, and I cannot say enough how magical and wonderful that place is and how transformative it was in my life and also in the lives of the students and the other people that I worked with. It is a wonderful place. And also, this interview is for sure one where there's a part of me that does not do very well with compliments. There's also a part of me that doesn't do very well with compliments that are then put into a podcast, and then where I release the podcast and it goes out into the world. So for sure, this interview is a wonderful one that I really enjoyed doing with Lauren Kennedy, a former student and a person that I've come to know as a friend, and who I admire very much. But there are parts in there where Lauren is very complimentary, and for the sake of the history, I leave it in there. So this is the first of what I hope to be many, many interviews with Lauren Kennedy over the years. It is the only one in this particular series. It was recorded on April 10th, 2024. Enjoy the interview. What about with you, Lauren? What's your earliest memory of art growing up?
You know, I did think about that when you reached out about the podcast, and sorry, it's kind of tacky, but it's mine.
Great.
You know, my dad and I have always been really close, and the thing that we used to do all the time growing up is we go to the bookstore together. And in Little Rock, that was Barnes & Noble or Books A Million. Those were the two stops we would always do. And I remember being at a Books A Million with him, and I had already picked out my Goosebumps that I was going to get that day, and was just kind of rattling around and ended up looking at some of those big coffee table books that are always on sale in those bookstores. And there was an Edgar Degas book that just knocked me over. And that's the beginning.
See, I'll see your Degas and raise you a Patrick Nagel.
Okay.
Because
yes.
that wasn't the earliest memory of art for sure, but that was definitely, I think, one of my first art books. So don't feel weird or tacky. Okay, so, and then also another thing that I'm trying to do in this is that I've noticed that sometimes when my mic is on, I will do this thing where I go like this. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Or there'll be noise from behind me.
Sure.
And then, so I'm going to kill my mic. And so when it's time for me to ask a question, I'll press it. But anyway, okay. So did you end up getting that book?
I didn't get that book, but I did end up at some point, I think, like buying, my mom or dad bought me a Degas print. And I had a print or two in my room, along with like Justin Taylor Thomas and that kind of thing.
And then do you remember what the Degas image was?
It was, I'm pretty sure it was, I know one of them was the ballerina with her back to you and her hands tucked behind her back and her foot's kind of pointed in one direction, I think. I can see it in my head. I don't know the title of it or anything.
And so was art elsewhere in the house?
So my mom and dad and my grandmother had a handful of original pieces that they bought like on trips to New Orleans, right? There was this one guy that I know that they liked. But beyond that, like it wasn't It wasn't a big thing growing up. And, my parents get kind of irritated with me when I talk about it like that because they think I make them sound like rednecks. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm doing. It's just like it wasn't something that we sought out, right? But then as I found that it was something that I gravitated towards, they've gone on this big, crazy journey with me, I started pulling them into going to museums and stuff, and had one of those teachers in high school that just kind of sets you on fire about something, and like he took what happened with that Degas book at Books A Million to a whole nother level, because Mr. Johnson was teaching European history and worked a lot of art history into that class, and we would watch those Sister Wendy videos. Do you remember those? They're great. And that amped everything up. And then, you fast forward and my dad is going...
All right, hang on.
Yes.
So my job here is to do a couple of things.
Okay.
One, ask follow-up questions.
Yes.
Because I've realized in my life that I'm very bad at that. The other thing is to pull the reins back a bunch.
Great.
And so if...
No fast forwarding.
The best is Beth Edwards, where I asked Beth that question, and
Yeah.
then she literally finished the sentence with, and then that leads me to what I'm working on today. And I was like, Beth, hang on. We're gonna have to back up just a little bit, okay? So hang on.
Duly noted.
Okay, so I'm gonna do some rain pulling. So okay. And so your parents, I love this idea that they went on this journey with you. I mean, to me, that's
really
such a great thing.
Yeah.
And so when you had the art in the room, were you the only? And remind me, like, what age did you say was it that you got this Degas print along with the Justin Thomas Taylor?
Let's say middle school.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So at this point, you were kind of aware of it. Now,
Yeah.
what about before that? Before that, was there any school trips to the museum or anything where you had, maybe other people in your class who were making art, or you were interested in making art, or was any of that present?
You know what? Not really. But the one thing that kind of was like percolating in the back of my brain is, so growing up, Little Rock is not far, and my aunt and uncle, my mom's sister, lived in West Memphis, and we would spend a week every summer with her in West Memphis, and we'd come up here a good bit. And at some point, we went to this gigantic Titanic exhibit at the Pyramid. Does that ring a bell? Yeah.
Yeah, they had these massive sort of touring historical exhibitions,
Yes.
and they would be at the Pyramid or at the Convention Center. And so my mom, if I remember, it was a docent for the Napoleon one, and then there was a Catherine the Great, and then
Yeah.
there was a Ramses.
Yep.
The Titanic one, I don't remember specifically, but that falls right in line with my memory of that.
And there was another big one from Dresden, just like art and objects from Dresden. And I remember we got that catalog, and that catalog is another book that looms large in my relationship with art, I guess. And what's silly is I know that there was a lot of great art in that show because I remember spending a lot of time in that catalog, but there was also this gigantic green diamond, which was like one of the only green diamonds in the world. And I still have a deck of playing cards that we bought from that show with the green diamond on it.
Now, do you remember any other pieces of art from that collection?
I don't off the top of my head. I mostly remember the diamond. Maybe it's because I still use these playing cards. I wonder if that book is still floating around my mom and dad's house. It might be.
And so was this, I mean, you went to this thing.
Yeah.
And then your parents obviously were supportive enough to get you these Degas prints and to have these things in the house and to encourage this kind of thing. And so, and you were also saying earlier that they kind of went along with that. And I can't remember, you have siblings?
Yeah, I've got a little sister.
Okay. But 5 or 6 years younger?
She's 22 months younger.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So super close.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when you had these two Degas images in your room, like when your other friends would come over, would they be like, what are you doing? Why do you have these weird pastel drawings of ballerinas on your wall? Or was it just kind of like normal?
I think it was just kind of normal. I mean, I think having prints and posters of different things in your room is just, it's kind of like, it feels like part of that big transition to having like a grown-up kid room, you know, when you start to actually kind of develop your personality and the things that you like, not just what your parents like. I don't really remember any of my friends asking about it.
Now, was it a thing that, like, when you would go to your friend's house, would they have posters on their wall that were of fine art images?
I don't remember that. I mean, the kind of art that I remember, like, being around is like George Rodriguez Blue Dogs, you know?
I know you like those.
Yeah, you know, I have a very specific relationship with the Blue Dogs. But that's the kind of stuff that I remember. Like, I think going to things like the Dresden show or the Titanic show, it's like there were these cultural kind of events that we would go to that art was a part of. But it was really all more kind of wrapped up almost in like tourism and trips and things like that, you know? And then I think just history too. My dad's a big history nerd. I'm a big history nerd. That was always one of my favorite subjects in school. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, all of my earliest memories of art are connected to these big catalog books. Because I also remember growing up, my dad had this old copy of a show that toured around the country of like Tutankhamun's tomb. And I'm really certain I still have that book somewhere. But I know it was my grandfather's copy, and I was just fascinated by it. And actually, growing up, other than wanting to be a storm chaser, specifically because of the movie Twister, the thing that I remember wanting to be most was an Egyptologist. Because this book just like was kind of everything for me. I was fascinated by it.
For me, part of the thing, like I remember, I don't think I saw that exhibition, but I remember that one. I think that one was one of the ones that we had here.
I think so.
But I think, like for me, one of the things that was real interesting about that art was kind of the myth or the mythology or the legend or the curse, like that kind of thing. And so there was kind of this like sci-fi aspect to it that was appealing to me.
Yeah.
What about for you? What were some things that were particularly striking? Or, I mean, of course, my Egyptology friends in the world, I know you're like, duh, Hamlet, Egyptology. But like, just out of curiosity, what is that, what was that thing that struck you?
I think the mythology of it is certainly part of it, right? The idea that you would still be talking about somebody that lived thousands of years before you did, and that we still have these objects from when they were here. And I mean, there's an opulence to them too, you know, all of the gilt and some of these colors that have lasted the test of time, and just even the idea that was this crazy burial ritual, that you would be buried under a gigantic ton of rocks with all of these gifts to take to the other side. That I find all of that really fascinating. And not to jump ahead, pull your reins, but you know, like that showed up for me really big in studying art history in college too. There's a parallel universe to this one where I became an ancient art historian and loved every second of it.
I have an alternate universe too, and it's the one where when I was a little kid, I found out that the Spanish word for dinosaurs is dinosaurios, because I didn't know that until like last year.
Yeah.
And then if I had known that though when I was a kid, I would totally be a Spanish language speaking archaeologist.
I love that.
So thinking about alternate universes, I love how you talk about that. Another thing that I've noticed is a common thread in these interviews is that as a parent, I am super curious what it was that your parents did. Like you were saying, your dad was a super history nerd. Like in what way did your dad's big history nerddom sort of shine or reveal itself to you?
He's the kind of guy that listens to like oldie-timey radio stations. Like there's a Sirius FM channel that's just replaying oldie-timey radio shows where they're like doing bits back and forth. And he, has all of these books. He has tons and tons of books on military history, and that I think that's kind of his primary interest. Really, is military history. And so I remember growing up and seeing these things laying around, and he loves the opportunity to like dig up a little factoid for you about that kind of thing. And I think it also connects to an interest in politics for him too, and that's something that I feel like he and I have talked a lot about. And he still, I think to this day, I'm 37 years old, and he still wants me to become a politician. And I'm like, Daddy, that ship has sailed. But I appreciate that you hold this in your heart for me. So yeah, and then, I think one of the major experiences of my childhood is watching movies. We're a big movie family. And his love for history would show up in some of the movies that he would pick when it was his turn to pick a movie, And we had a really big relationship with the movie Gladiator. When that was, I can't even tell you how many times I've watched the movie Gladiator. Braveheart, these kinds of things. Like, I think that's probably the biggest way that we, as a family, like exercised everybody's individual personalities or shared that with each other, in the movies that we would each get to pick.
And what about your mom? What was your mom doing?
My mom, so the same time that my dad and I are going to Books A Million, my mom, I picture running around in her little two-door black Lexus going to Sonic to get a Route 44 Diet Dr. Pepper with vanilla in it, listening to Celine Dion and Boyz II Men and singing along very badly, both of us. My mom was a very social creature at this time in my life, and so she would like pick me up from school, and we'd go and meet her friends at the Mexican restaurant, and they would have a little happy hour thing, and we'd just be kind of cruising and hanging out and cooking, hosting. They would have these big crazy card games where there'd be a big group of couples from our church that would come over, and they would like rotate whose house they would go to, and they'd be playing cards all night, and the kids were all hanging out in one room, and we were told, unless you're bleeding, you're okay. We're hanging. So yeah, she was this very fun social person who kind of kept everybody together, like kept bringing us all together, family and friends alike.
Mm-hmm. And then your sister? You said she's just almost 2 years younger.
Yeah. She and I were probably just fighting. We bickered pretty hardcore as kids. But she was also this kid that like tried everything for like at least a year. She did gymnastics. She tried the flute, basketball, volleyball. Like she just kind of, her interests were wide and varied, but also short. She'd move on to the next thing. And I just remember her being kind of all elbows and knees and running around like a crazy person.
And then you were talking about doing these trips with your family and how art would always kind of be a part of that. Like for me, that's kind of, my poor kids are like, well, we would go to the Art Institute in Chicago, and then we would do these other things. And so what about, do you remember some places that you went that were particularly important for you as someone who's really interested in art?
We went to New Orleans. This was kind of like the last big trip for us all as a family before I started college. We went to New Orleans, and I remember us poking around galleries and going to those big markets and stuff. And that was a really big and wonderful trip that I think fondly about. And then probably my favorite trip that we ever went on was, my mom was always hosting the holidays. We were always hosting the holidays at our house. And there was one year where she said, for Thanksgiving, I'm not doing it. You're all on your own. The four of us are going to Eureka Springs. We're staying in a cabin. And we'll see y'all at Christmas. And Eureka Springs is such a weird and funky place. It's one of my favorite places in the United States. And there are a bunch of just like weird little galleries and magic shops and jewelry stores and vintage stores all on this like strip in the center of town. And that was a really big and great trip. I think it's actually everybody's favorite Thanksgiving memory. And actually I remember vividly watching Braveheart in the cabin just to bring it back.
Everything's connected.
Yeah. So those are the kind of things that I remember doing. It wasn't going to the Art Institute, but it was, maybe shopping through town and kind of getting to see things as you're bebopping along. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when I'm doing these interviews, and there's a part in my brain that's like, man, Hamlet, just don't worry about the chronology. Just let the people kind of talk about the thing they want to talk about. And then there's another part of me that's like, well, we got to talk about books with Lauren at some point, because I know that you're a huge book huffer as well. And so I don't want it to seem like a not related to the thing question, because you've mentioned books several times.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, and then also I'm envious. All of my parents' books were tore up with words. They didn't have any images in them at all. And so I was just like, yeah, there's some books over there. I don't care anything about them. And so what do you remember about looking through your dad's books? Or your mom's books? Your family books?
Yeah, because my mom's a reader too, but my dad that's always been the thing that he and I kind of can't get enough of. And my sister's a big reader too, actually. I just remember, having books kind of all over the house and going and like being excited about getting to get something new. And, I love that kind of downtime where you can just be in the room with somebody and you both have a book and you're hanging out, but you're not, you're doing your own thing and in your own little world.
Me as a kid, so much of my time with my parents was not necessarily book time, but it was kind of like parallel play while listening to music time. Like my parents would put on music and then I would draw or I would play with Legos or whatever, and then my mom would do, whatever she was doing, and same with my dad.
Music for us was always in the car.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was a big part of our car experience. Road trip or just like running around town.
Right.
That's where I remember music being.
Right. And you already mentioned Justin Taylor Thomas. He was in the Backstreet Boys or something?
No, he was in Home Improvement. Remember? He was the heartthrob kid.
Okay.
In Home Improvement.
Okay, I'm sorry. That was bad. I'll let Mama edit that part out. So did you... was music a big part of your growing up as well? And then it, just out of curiosity, like what?
Yeah, music and movies were like the biggest cultural products that we just consumed a lot. And, in my mom's car, it was like 90s country and pop. And in my dad's car, it was like rock and roll and then like weird like funk collections that you could buy at Eddie Bauer. You remember those like volume 1 of whatever era of music? Mm-hmm. My dad was big on those kinds of things. And so the music taste definitely varied between the two vehicles. But they both show up actually in what I listen to today, like I get a deep love of Reba McEntire from my mom and Fleetwood Mac from my dad. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier when you were jumping ahead, you mentioned earlier the thing about your high school teacher. You had a high school teacher that talked about art history?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, he was fascinating. Mr. Johnson. Yeah, this was... we moved to suburban Dallas my junior year of high school, and I think that I took this class junior year. I can't remember if it was junior or senior, but yeah, he was kind of the like funky teacher at the high school. Like he had dyed hair and he had Clash posters on his wall in his room and stuff. And yeah, I took this European history class from him, and he just worked a lot of art history into it. And we'd watch those Sister Wendy videos, and I just really liked the way he talked about it. He was one of those teachers that when you're young, you were like, oh man, you're so cool. But like, I can tell you're such a nerd too, but you're still really cool. And actually, I think he probably took me to my first truly dedicated art museum. Now that I think about it, we went to the Meadows Museum in Dallas as a field trip with his class to see a particular traveling show that connected to something we were studying in European history. And then he took us to this cool German restaurant for lunch. It was like one of the best field trips ever.
Now, what do you remember about that show?
The Meadows Museum is this kind of beautiful space in like an old house. Like there's a lot of rich crown molding and architectural details, and the walls aren't necessarily painted white, you know. And I love viewing art in that kind of way, you know. I like. I mean, I'm an art nerd, right? So I like going and having that big, overwhelming white cube, sacred experience, but seeing things in that kind of home environment or home adjacent environment does something different for me. And I mean, I remember seeing really large scale stuff in these ornate gilt frames and just like being kind of blown away by just how beautiful it was. And I think it's really different when you're looking at something in a book and then when you see it in person. And that's always been something that has really struck me when I get to go to these big museum experiences, is seeing it in person it just makes me feel kind of wild and amazing.
And then there's another thing that I'm trying to do in this too, is to imagine the brain of my first year students at U of M. And so what I know you and I both are like, yeah, of course, you know, looking at art in real life is super awesome. But if we had to make the verbal conversational argument for it, what would it be?
You just don't get the kind of details and texture, and you know, I love seeing the artist's hand. I love like actually getting to look really closely at brush strokes, and you know, it's images are flat, and these things are not in person, you know. And I think there's something too about those pieces that are part of like art history canon, that once you're standing in front of it, there's something for me about feeling like closer to that history, and you know, you can't know those kind of aha moments necessarily when they're happening. I think that we see that more in retrospect, looking back on things, but feeling like you get to kind of observe this piece of history that has these through lines to work that's being made right now, or that informed things that I'm doing now as a person alive in 2024 is, I don't know, it's kind of staggering to me. Yeah. And you just can't see everything from Instagram. You can see very little from Instagram.
Right.
You're scrolling, you're running around, you've got the ads for whatever your algorithm feeds you, and you don't get any of that delicious detail.
Now, what do you remember about the teacher? I'm sorry, I lost the name.
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnson. What do you remember? Like you were saying, he was a big history nerd.
Yeah.
And another thing that I'm always wondering about is like what it is that these teachers do to get the students so excited about the stuff. Can you remember anything in particular that sort of rises to the top in terms of your memories of him as a teacher?
I think he was one of the younger teachers at the school, and he had these references for pop culture that were not the references that I had. And I think the best thing that you can experience as you're growing up is just encountering people who are into different things and that introduce you to things that you wouldn't have found on your own, listening to Fleetwood Mac and Reba McEntire, with your mom and dad. And so there was something about him that struck me as cool in this way that wasn't too cool or inaccessible. And I think he had this way of talking to us that he was excited about what he was sharing, and he was passionate about the information and the history. And, I think that is more easily transferable to the people that you're teaching when you feel on fire about something. And nerds see each other, and I think without even totally realizing what a nerd I was at that point, I think I felt some kind of nerdy kinship with him.
Well, I mean, I'm with you. And so in terms of thinking about that, what do you, like part of me wants to say, you've always kind of owned your nerdiness. You've always kind of been aware of it. Like, I think when I met you, you were like, I'm going to be a curator, or I'm going to be something. It was like it was like when my daughter would introduce herself as an actress when she was 8. It was like that same kind of vibe, and I was like, oh, okay, little freshman or whatever it was.
Yeah. That was almost 20 years ago. Did you know that?
Let's not talk about that.
Okay.
And so another question, like you were talking about seeing art in that museum space, Dallas is tore up with good art.
Oh my God, it's nuts.
And so was this something that you would also go to the DMA or to some of those other spaces?
Not until I went back to Dallas after college, really, or maybe kind of as I would go back to and spend the summers or something there. College is really where this almost casual kind of interest became this like fully developed fascination with art.
Perfect segue.
Thank you.
Now, I know that there is this tear in the fabric of space-time that separates Rhodes College from Texas, but how was it that Rhodes College came to be on your radar?
I think because, I mentioned my aunt and uncle living in West Memphis, I was aware of Rhodes, because when we would spend summers there, we'd come into Memphis and go to the zoo or, go to the mall and go to the movie theater, those kinds of things. So, I knew that it was here, and then I'm sure got some kind of paraphernalia in the mail when it was time to be applying and stuff. And it was one of 6 colleges that I applied to, and actually kind of last minute, I think I had made my mind up to go to TWU in Fort Worth. And one of my best friends from high school was going, and I was like, oh great, we're going to room together. Perfect. Life figured out. And then my sister's boyfriend at the time was my year in high school, and he wanted to look at Rhodes, and I was like, yeah, let's just drive up and look at it. And stopped through Little Rock, surprised my grandmother, very sweet memory for me, and came up here in April on one of those absolutely perfect Memphis spring days. And all the flowers are blooming, the campus is gorgeous. Also a Harry Potter fan, that, feeling that it looks like Hogwarts. And I just changed my mind that weekend and decided that's where I was going to go.
And I totally get that. I mean, Rhodes College during that time is just like one of the
gorgeous,
most idyllic places in the world.
Yeah.
And it's also this kind of it has a warmth to it, especially then. And so you decided to go to Rhodes, and then did you know from that time when you decided to go to college that you were going to be deep in the land of art history?
I did. I think I was kind of an outlier with my friends coming in like ready to declare a major.
Right.
And I mean, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous when I think about it now, but you know, I'm going to attribute that really to Mr. Johnson and that European history class. I knew from that class that I really, really wanted to study art history. So I came in, I think I took something probably the first semester, and kind of that whole time, I don't think I really, maybe there was a minute where I was like, oh, international relations would be cool too, you know, in the way that students will do those kinds of things. Yeah, but it was very early on, like a very clear path that I wanted to follow. Not that I knew what that meant in terms of a career path. But
And what year was that you started? P.S. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, Brittany Boyd Bullock came and visited my professional practices class, and she has this thing that is going to impact this podcast tremendously, which is when she was giving her presentation, every once in a while she would go, timestamp, 2007, and then she would and then she would go to the next thing. She'd be like, timestamp, 2018, and then she would, and it was this great thing.
I like that.
And so, what's the timestamp on you starting school?
2004.
Okay, so you started in 2004, and like I said, do I remember right? You took gallery management when you were like a sophomore?
Yeah.
Or something bonkers like that?
Maybe. I don't remember, but I did. I definitely took that class with you.
Yes. I remember it was very early, and I remember being like, yeah, we don't let freshmen or sophomores take this class.
Maybe you told me I needed to wait, and then I took it later.
When you were a sophomore. Because like I remember you coming in with like the pashmina, and like you looked like an art historian. And I remember thinking like, why does this kid not look like the other Rhodes kids?
That sounds right.
And so when you got here to U of M, I love that thing that you were saying about your high school teacher. You know, like one thing that all of these interviews have in common, with the exception of I think Jamie Harmon, everybody talks about the pivotal experience that they had with the art teacher in high school, or some other teacher in high school. For Frederick Keppel, it was, oddly enough, the same man who was my senior enriched English teacher was his English teacher at Fraser High School.
That's wild.
30 years or 40 years before. Anyway, that was a long story. But I'm really interested in that thing that you were talking about. And so when you came to Rhodes, what classes were you taking? Was it just sort of the normal freshman fare?
Yeah, I did the kind of survey 1 and 2 classes. You know, started with your like foundational art history classes.
Now, who was teaching that?
Victor Coonan.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, what do you remember about that class?
I remember that they were still using slides. And actually I had a work study job, I think my sophomore year, where I was converting slides into digital images. And yeah, I just remember getting to look at all of these things and starting to understand the relationships between them and how kind of things or influence later movements or generations of artists, and how things come in and out of fashion too. I've always found that really interesting in terms of art history. But then I also got to take some really funky classes with random folks, like this class on the ancient novel with Catherine Panagakos has always stood out as one of my favorites at Rhodes, and a black film class with Dwayne Pruitt. That was wild.
Now, wait, back up a little bit. What was it about the writing or the literature class that stuck with you?
Honestly, it was the final for the class that I'll always remember super well. Those ancient Greek and Roman novels read like crazy romance novels today. And so one of the options for the final was to take one of the books that we had read in class, read like a grocery store romance novel, and compare the two. And it was awesome. It was just like a really fun assignment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then were you making connections between the things that you were reading in there and then some of the art that you were also seeing in Victor's class?
Yeah, maybe more so when I actually took like an ancient art class from, God, do you remember that woman's name? She was really short and she had like wild frizzy hair.
Glenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Swan.
Glenda Swan. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. So I made connections between some of those books and the work that we really focused on in that class with Professor Swan.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, like I've gotten to see, like when I was at Rhodes, I would watch Victor teach, mm-hmm. and then last year he was at U of M, and so I sat in on a couple of his classes, and I'm always reminded, like you were talking about owning nerddom.
Yes.
I mean, to me, one of the things that I hope more than anything is that my children will one day love anything as much as Victor gets excited about art history. Like anything.
And specifically Italian Renaissance art history.
And I just like, one of the things I love about Victor's classes is that he is so into it. Mm-hmm. And then also this thing about like, sometimes when I'm talking about art, I'm like, all right, so this might just be me, but Victor never acknowledges the presence of himself or the presence of his possible bias. Like he's just thinking about how totally bonkers he is about this and how anybody can see how exciting this is. And so, do you remember some things? Go ahead, you do that.
Sorry.
That's okay. I know you got a kid.
I've got
stuff.
Somebody doing I put my foot through the ceiling at the gallery in the bathroom. So I've got somebody fixing it. Right.
Oh, you guys have upstairs?
I've got a little attic space for some box storage.
And that's where the bathroom is? Oh, yeah. No. There's a storage and then it goes into the bathroom downstairs.
Yeah, it's over the bathroom.
Oh my gosh.
So, that's okay. The life of a small business owner.
Anything you need to get is totally fine.
Thank you. But yes, Victor is so excited and enthralled by the subject.
Right.
And that's very infectious for me.
Was there anything so you had these two survey courses. One, Victor taught both of them?
I think he did.
Okay.
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. And then what about the other crew there? Because like I know like a lot of the people that I've been talking to about their college or high school experience, so much of it is sort of formed by not just the instructors, but also the people who are their cohorts in a particular program.
Yeah.
And what about for you?
I had, it wasn't a contemporary art class. Maybe it was just focused on modern art with David McCarthy, who I found incredibly intimidating when I was a student. And now I've seen him dance, and I'm not intimidated by him any longer. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. With love and respect to David McCarthy and his dance moves. Mm-hmm. But I remember that class being a big one for me. But I think one thing that I really benefited from, too, was being part of that CODA program. What does that stand for again? Like Center for Outreach and Development in the Arts.
You got it.
So I was like one of the first guinea pigs for this new scholarship program that they had that was really about, creating opportunities for students in the arts. And through that program, I got to go to New York for the first time. I went to MoMA for the first time. I got an internship with a small arts nonprofit in Dallas over a summer break. I got to curate some weird shows on campus and in vacant storefronts downtown. So I think aside from just loving to study art history, the gallery management class with you and that experience with CODA are like the two biggest components for me of my time in college.
Okay. So we were talking about the people that you were there in college with.
Yeah.
Who were some other people that stood out to you in terms of being, I mean, because of course we all have friends, but then there are some people who may or may not necessarily be friends, but they were particularly important in terms of shaping or building a kind of intensity. What about for you?
You know, I had a big friendship when I was in college with Laura Ann Daly, and she was a fine art studio major, and you know, I remember just being kind of wowed by what she was making and really excited about it. And Alex Carter was somebody who kind of captured me in that way, and Joel Parsons, who I was friends with in college, but then have become even closer to since we both graduated. And he was one of the first shows I ever put together in Material, Rest and Power, Material. And now here I am owning a gallery and getting to work with him in this new way, which is really very special. Donna Smith, you know, was somebody who was making work when we were there, and she's just like such a warm and wonderful and caring person. Yeah, and just that was probably really my first time being in college, being around people who were making art. And I just really remember that being like a very powerful experience to like know somebody, you know, hang out with them at the cafeteria, be at a party with them, get to know them in their lives, and then see them making things. And that's still a really big experience in my life, but that was really the first time I think I felt that.
And you know, I mean, I know you and I know all those people, and of course my experience with you guys is all in the classroom or outside of the classroom later in life. But I'm always wondering, like, how much are my students talking about art, or how much do college students talk about art? Because I didn't at all when I was a college student. I didn't really talk about art with friends until after when I started going to grad school, or when I had a studio in between undergrad and grad school. Like, that was never a part of my friendship banter. It was never really about art at all. What about for you? Did you guys talk about art, or was it mostly just like they were passionate?
You know, it was probably mostly just being around them and being in some of the same classes with them, and being in that building and seeing things as people were working on them. But you know, I thought about this driving over here today, and I wonder if you remember this particular class that you were teaching in the gallery management class. But that class in particular, I feel like was one of the first things that maybe compelled me to like chew on ideas about art. Probably also the modern art class with David. I think those classes led me to talking about it with people. Because I remember kind of vividly, there was this, you showed this Pipilotti wrist video that I had a very strong negative reaction to, and you just kind of laughed at me in a like loving and productive way, which I have since changed my opinion about. But I think it was as I was exposed to some of these weirder ideas and practices and thoughts that led me to kind of talking about them with people. And again, because of that CODA experience, I think I got to have some conversations with people through that I maybe wasn't necessarily having with, you know, the people in my sorority, because I was one of those people who did that sorority thing. So my friends knew that art was my jam. Like that was an identifiable characteristic for me at college. But then I was also just like a dumb, drunk college student a lot of the time too. So,
Yeah, me too.
yeah.
Okay, and so you mentioned Coda a couple of times. I would love to. I think you're first of all, I think you're the first person that I've ever interviewed that was a student.
Uh-huh.
And so, of course, when you compliment me, there's a part of me that's like, well, no, yeah, okay, let's talk about this other thing. But I mean, if you want to talk about how awesome I am, that's great.
You are an
but-
incredible professor.
But
you are.
I mean, there's a part of me that's like, oh my God, and then someone finds this audio recording somewhere and they're like, oh my God, Hamlet just totally had Lauren in there to sort of psych him up.
No way.
Okay, so, but I do want to talk a little bit, and so that's sort of strange for me.
I appreciate that.
Truth be told.
I appreciate that.
And so, but I do, and you're also the first person. I don't think you're the youngest person I've interviewed. I interviewed Victoria Jones from Tone real early on.
Yeah.
But for sure, the first person who was a Rhodes student, and to me that Coda, I mean, it was such a game changer for us on the faculty. I mean, it was
for me as a student.
a massive opportunity. I mean, we always had a decent budget, like I was always able to kind of do stuff,
Yeah.
and like if I wanted to, I don't know, order a video or something, I could, and there was always this wonderful financial freedom at Rhodes. But when Coda came, and it wasn't like we were, throwing champagne parties or anything like that, but it was like, oh my God, all of these students can now, instead of trying to find an empty storefront in some weird, shady person, not that there's anything wrong with shady people who own storefronts, but they can be grown-ups and they can say, hey, I've got $200 or however much money they negotiated.
Yeah.
I mean, it was such a huge game changer. And I mean, and then also thinking about, you as a college student being able to do all this traveling, but also to have this cohort of people, because it was one of those things where like you came in and there were like 6 or 7 or 10 of you or something, and then you guys would kind of be in the program together, and then it would kind of grow and change. Do I remember that right?
Yeah. I think maybe starting out there were maybe 6 of us, and then it was like 3 or 4 people each new class they would add. And it was like your kind of own little special group of people. And, I think between the people who were facilitating it and the people that they introduced us to, like Pascal Spangeman, who, has been in the New York gallery scene for decades now. I think, I know that oftentimes people that end up in a particular career path will recognize that meeting somebody in that field as a young person made them realize, like, oh, there's this whole professional world over here that I don't know anything about, but that opens up doors in your brain to thinking about how you could maybe get to that point. That was definitely a really pivotal experience for me, getting access to those people and those conversations and getting to go see stuff, and it was huge.
Now, I think everyone who goes to MoMA or goes to New York has like a kind of a concrete thing that they have in their brain in terms of something that kind of blew their mind. What about for you?
It was Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon.
Really? I wonder why. I mean, I get it. It's a fantastic painting. I'm not pooping on it.
Yeah.
But like, what do you think it was? Was it just the mythology that was kind of around that piece, or was it? And then also, I mean, it gets talked about a lot, and of course the history classes.
Yeah.
What do you think it was?
Definitely the mythology of it, right? Like that was very impressive for me to get to encounter this piece that lives large in the canon. Also, the scale of it was so much bigger than I expected it to be. That standing in front of it, it's like more than life size for me, and that was just really, it was very impressive to see. And then of course there's just like so many gems at a place like MoMA, and I don't know if we were guided in this direction to do it the way we did it, but for what it like. We went up to the very top floor and then wound our way down, and that's how I do every art museum experience. I like to start at the top and come back down. So yeah, it blew my mind. It blew my mind. Picasso, is also a problematic figure in art history, but, at the time, conversations were different than they are right now, and you continue to learn and grow.
And so, what do you remember other things? Like, of course, you guys probably went to the Met. Was there something in there that was like, what?
Gosh, should we go to the Met on that trip? We went to a bunch of galleries in Chelsea.
Okay.
Which was a fantastic experience.
Anything stand out?
I don't remember necessarily what art I saw in those galleries. God, it was so long ago. I bet, in the middle of the night in a couple of days, something will hit me and I'll just randomly text it to you.
You could just send it to me as a voice memo and then I'll dub it in somehow.
We'll do that. We'll do that. I do remember going to Gagosian. And I think that there was actually a Damien Hirst piece on view. Who's somebody that I definitely had to chew on a lot in my brain when I was kind of getting into this space.
And so you made this trip, and what was like you say, we made this trip, but then there's a part of me that's like, well, how did you do this? Like, was it one of those things where you guys had like a van, or was it one of those things where you guys all flew up together?
We all flew up there together, and then we went to see a production on Broadway because there were some theater folks who were a part of the program too, and music folks. So we also took in some other kinds of arts and culture on the trip. Met with some Rhodes alum who are in the arts up there now, and that was very cool. And then the next year we got to do the same thing in Chicago, which was also great. We must have gone to the Met. I know we went to the Art Institute when we were in Chicago, and that was just staggering as well.
Because that was the first time you had been there as well.
Yeah, both of my first trips, to those places. And since I've gotten to go back, but, the first time you're in one of those massive cities is pretty special.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then what about outside of those experiences? Like, were you guys hanging out and having dinner together and talking about these experiences? And I mean, I just sort of envisioned the plane ride home. There was just like, what? Do you remember this one thing? And there was this thing?
I mean, all of our minds were blown. All of our minds were blown. And we met once a week, I think. And would be introduced to different kinds of people and projects and things. And so it was a really special experience. I also got to go abroad my junior year, and I did a semester in Paris. And there I ran around and went to just about every museum I could go to. And I did an internship at Sotheby's in Paris, which was super wild and fascinating. And that was another really big early experience for me that whole semester. I went to the Louvre several times, and everybody talks about the Mona Lisa and yes, great painting. What are you thinking about, lady? Love to know. But where it's at, there are two places where it's at in the Louvre that people are sleeping on. And one is just down the hall from the Mona Lisa, Caravaggio's Death of the Virgin. Knocked me flat on my ass. I will never be over that painting, ever. But for the rest of my life, I'll be in love with that painting. And the Mesopotamia section.
Okay, let's stick with Caravaggio, then we'll go to Mesopotamia.
Okay.
All right, now what was it about that Caravaggio?
Oh, God. When artists play with fabric, especially in painting, but also in sculpture, it just reaches into my chest and squeezes my heart. I don't know what it is about the fabric, but there's that really gorgeous, rich red fabric, which was, so controversial for him to use at the time because you didn't use the color red in association with the Virgin Mary. And you see the bottom of her foot, which was also very taboo. And seeing the bottom of somebody's foot's very intimate, and you kind of get that sense from it. And it's also just another one of those gigantic paintings. And Caravaggio's painting style is so rich. It's like almost decadent, like eating a piece of really rich cheesecake that's almost too much, but you also can't stop. Man, I just fucking love that painting. I really do. I've gotten to go back to the Louvre at least once since that time when I was studying abroad, and I got to see it again. And every time I'm in Paris, I got to try and see it. Yeah.
And you were there for a semester.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
and
it was
then,
very cool.
What was, it seems like that would be bonkers in and of itself, just like this semester in Paris, your junior year.
Yeah.
But to take over a little bit for a while and just tell me about that, because I'm super curious about, before we get to Paris, Mesopotamia. Sorry, let that drop. Yeah.
Thank you for coming back to Mesopotamia. Like I mentioned before, ancient art history I just find really fascinating, and I love the idea that this is what art is, what will last, is what people will remember and reflect on and put in a museum. Like it's this archive and this remnant, and I think that's really, really compelling in and of itself. And there's something too about just knowing the age of some of these things and how long they have lasted. Like whenever I'm in an ancient civilization kind of section of a museum and I see any kind of intact glass object, my mind is just blown. Like, how has this piece of glass lived this long? That's just insane to me. But the lines and the details and the patterns and the animals that are real and not real, and I find it really, really deeply fascinating.
And also, it's way less crowded.
And not lying. Yeah. So you can take it in a way that doesn't feel as frenzied, where the rest of the museum can feel like very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Now, what else in Paris?
I saw this great Lee Friedlander show when I was there, photographer. That I actually saw that show towards the end of my semester, which felt like it was kind of a nice segue to think about going back to America, because all these very American images kind of made me feel like, oh, okay, I might be ready to go home. The Palais de Tokyo, nuts.
It's bonkers.
Yeah. There was this sculpture of this little person, like it looked like it would maybe be a child. I think that it had a beanie on. I don't remember the name of the artist, but it was a mechanical sculpture, and the head of the sculpture would just hit the wall every so often, banging its head into the wall. That was it was crazy. It was crazy. I went to the Rodin Museum. I went to the Picasso Museum.
Now, what about, because I think you're sort of touching on these things that are these sort of massive, almost like institutions.
Yeah.
And so, and then also kind of thinking about this thing where it's nice to hear people dig a little bit deeper, like in the way that you were talking about that Caravaggio was really beautiful. What do you, and then of course I think about like Rodin as kind of being, as being someone that I was always aware of somehow. No, not somehow, because my mom and dad had a little bronze thinker, and of course that was in there. They didn't have the thinker, they had the kiss.
Okay.
Anyway, that's always there. And so what was it about the Rodin, let's go Rodin, then we'll go Picasso Museum?
I think going in to visit the Rodin Museum, I didn't have a big feeling about his work. But I think that anytime you get to see like a large collection of somebody's work in one space, it just feels more compelling. And I think it was, again, going from only having seen it in books to seeing some of these objects in person was big for me, because you can see some of the detail where he's like carved out one of these elements of her hand or something, or the details of somebody's hair. And that was really neat. And then, in both the Rodin and Picasso museums, you can see these like studies and then becoming the fully formed version of that object, which I think is really interesting. And I like getting to get a sneak peek into the process of stuff, right? And again, both of those museums are in like old houses. That really is my favorite way to look at art. And so that was a neat. Those are both neat places to go. The Picasso Museum, the thing that always stands out to me the most is there was like a little collection of his just drawings, like loose sketches, in this one section. And they had a tiny little matchbox that had a drawing on the bottom of the inside of the matchbox, which I just remember being like, that's really fucking rad.
One of the things I really like about this process is that I've gotten to ask people about things, and of course, the thing that they notice is radically different than the thing that I notice or anyone else.
Yeah.
And it's interesting the way that you talked about your connection with your classmates, and then also your connection with seeing the Rodin pieces sort of accumulate. For me, that's also one of the great pleasures of being a teacher, is that I get to have this memory of my students when they first begin. And then, especially at Rhodes, because at Rhodes, I really would have someone their first year and their last year, there was nobody that would get through without having touched me or Aaron or whoever, Ben. And so like there was something that was real beautiful about that I really liked. And I think it seems like that would be a logical thing for you as someone who has been in the arts for so long to also really savor and really enjoy.
Yeah. I think as you were talking just then, something that came up for me was because I'm not a maker, I'm not an artist. I took that drawing class with you, and I actually still have a couple of those drawings, which, are real treasures for me, but I'm not an artist. And for a long time there, I think I felt bad about that. Like I wanted to be, but I was forcing it. And then I found peace in the fact that what I do is creative in just a different kind of way. But I think that, knowing people in college and getting to see them making work, and then going to some place like that, like the Rodin Museum, and seeing this process in this giant repository of work, I think that both of those stand out to me as being close to an artistic process that I know that I don't have. Does that make sense? Like, I think that that's, even though I've made peace with the fact that I'm not an artist now, I think it makes me feel closer to a process that I think is just really special.
Well, I think there's a bunch of things at work there. One, I think, is that there's a kind of, somehow, I'm not totally sure how it got in there, but there's this great kind of hierarchy that gets hammered so often. And, one of the things that's been so great about doing this process is that it's really made me pay much more attention to our secondary art education people. Not that I was ever like pooping on art teachers. My art teachers were really important and really pivotal to me, but I don't think it was as highlighted as it was. But also in terms of thinking about, what you're talking about here, I think a lot of times, especially at Rhodes, there was such a pressure on a kind of, not proving, but a kind of validation, or a kind of like, there's a lot at stake here. You know, you're at a really wonderful institution. You're surrounded by these really wonderful people. There's money involved.
Yeah.
There's also, you know, this kind of expectation from people when they graduate from school. And so I think a lot of times there's this kind of pressure for this validation. And I feel like, you know, these conversations that I would have with parents every reception after they graduated, you know, we would have that moment where the parent would talk to me and they would ask me questions, and you know, at some point I would say, you want to know when was the last time I borrowed money from my mom, right? And they would say, yeah, I do actually.
Yeah.
And then I would say, I haven't had to borrow money from my mom in a long time, you know, because there's a kind of like you were saying, this, you've come to peace with this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, looking at it as a teacher and then also someone who's so close to students, is the problem solving is so under highlighted. You know, it's never,
I think that's real.
we never sit there and say, we're problem solving right now. You know, like, P.S., you know, right now, this is put this in your problem solving toolbox. But it's really, I think, a really powerful, important part of the liberal arts education, but also a really, a part that lets students gather all of those things that they've thought about and that they've brought in that process, you know, that seems really important.
Well, and I think there's something about when you're studying these things in college, which is essentially like you're living in a vacuum, right? And you don't know the complexities of the world, right? Like you don't know what you don't know until you've learned it, right? And so I think there was just a lack of, I think there is a big lack of understanding about what the big machine and the ecosystem of the art world looks like, and how there are all of these different and needed roles and spaces and within that. And I think maybe when I was wanting to be an artist, I think I wasn't appreciating that there were all of these other ways for me to engage in this space that feel truer to who I am and my strengths. And I mean, and what you're saying about the pressure to validate and be successful, I mean, that's very, very real. I mean, I graduated from Rhodes in 2008 in, you know, an economic recession. And I run out into the world with an art history degree from a tiny liberal arts school in Memphis, and I'm running around Dallas and I can't get a job. And I was so shitty about it. I was such a jerk about it. I was living with my mom and dad, and I was working at a used bookstore and this trashy little fashion boutique. And honestly, one of the best periods in my life, looking back. It was a true golden period for me. But I was running around thinking, I've got this expensive degree. I should be doing, I didn't even really know what, but like, I should be working in a museum in some kind of way that's like clearly leading me to this bigger career path.
I love how you're like, yeah, and then Hamlet, and then way over there. Come on, back here, hang on.
Oh, yes.
So you're doing fine. So just a heads up, we got about a half hour left before
Okay.
the alarm goes off. I want to spend a little bit more time at Rhodes.
Okay.
And then also to think about McCarthy and David's pivotal. I mean, I think when you think about Rhodes as an institution, David is for sure a part of that.
Oh, yeah.
It just, for anyone who's taken one of his classes, and you were saying David was intimidating. I have no idea why. David's he's not intimidating at all. I'm just kidding.
Very intimidating as a student.
What was it? It was the intensity, right?
Yeah, well, and also just the way that he talks about art. Like he's really knowledgeable, very well read. He knows his shit. And I mean, this is one of the things that I still kind of struggle with even now in the context of like the contemporary art world machine. But talking about art isn't intimidating practice to do, especially when you're learning about something and you just don't want to sound dumb, you know? I remember feeling like, oh my God, he's so smart. I don't want to sound dumb as I'm like processing what I'm learning in this class.
Now, what do you remember about his classes? I mean, because you took probably several, right? Or just one?
I think I only had one with him because between the semester abroad and a sabbatical year for him, I think I only got the modern art class.
Okay.
Because I really wanted to take contemporary art with him, and I didn't get a chance to do that.
Okay. Now, what do you remember about David as a teacher?
I mean, I remember him being really kind of expansive about what he was bringing to us. I mean, expansive within the canon again, which is a thing and is limited in its scope. But yeah, I just remember feeling like he was unfolding all of these things that I didn't really know anything about. Because really up to that point, my understanding and experience of art had been art from, those survey classes or Renaissance history or things that were decidedly past. And so he really was kind of my entrance into thinking about art in this more modern setting where ideas just start to get wild and big. And, Jackson Pollock's work was never anything that had really grabbed me. But then when you learn about how radical it was for him to throw it on the floor and just be like stepping in the canvas and leaving cigarette butts and shit in there like that kind of blew my mind. And then you go on to learn that, Lee Krasner was right there doing her thing and stuff too. And, but it just opened up this whole other portal that I hadn't been down yet. And David was my guide.
And then, you were talking about Pollock and Krasner. Were there other people that you remember from that class that were other artists that David would talk about that he was particularly passionate about or made you see in a way that you had not necessarily had on your radar before?
Well, Warhol's his main jam, right? So that was...
No, Westerman is his main jam, followed by
Warhol. And there was a Warhol show up at the Brooks while I was in school too. And I worked in the membership department during that show. And I sold more memberships than anybody during the Warhol show. Just a little plug.
Now, you know that's still Jeff Koons's claim to fame, is that when he worked at the membership office at MoMA, he still has the record for having the most people, signing up the most people.
I didn't know that, but you know what? Let's channel that level of success.
Yes.
With Sheet Cake.
I'm with you. Okay. So now thinking about, because there's a lot of stuff in there. I want to be sure to talk about the city and like how you sort of were in Memphis kind of at that time, and some things that were kind of happening in Memphis at the time. But this area of McCarthy is for me particularly rich because he's such a he's kind of one of those teachers that I think sticks with a student. And he's one of those teachers that, in the same way that we were talking about a kind of infectious energy from other teachers, like there is a kind of determination and a kind of drive and a deep dive-ness to him. Like one of the things I remember, he wasn't even a teacher of mine, but I remember he did this presentation on Peter Saul's one of the Vietnam era paintings.
Oh, I feel like I went to that presentation.
Like at the Brooks, maybe.
Yeah.
And I remember him walking us through that painting, and it was one of the most like when I was in grad school, I also had this teacher, Craig Adcock, who is the art history person. He was like a big land art guy, but I remember I went into his modern art class or contemporary art class or whatever it was, and he was like, okay, for the next 2 classes, we're going to talk about Rosenquist F111. And I remember being like, we're going to do what now? And it wasn't just like click and then click and click, but he went through it like bit by bit.
Yeah.
And then also in terms of like navigating history at
Yeah.
the time. And so for me, that presentation of McCarthy's really hit me and really influences me as someone who talks about art to other people. And so like thinking about that presentation from McCarthy, there's something about him where, like you were saying, he knows a lot and he knows a lot really deeply.
But he's also like leading you to share what you're thinking or understanding from it too. Like he's doing a lot of that kind of open-ended. Well, why? Tell me what you're seeing.
Okay.
I think.
So that was happening in the classroom.
I think so. Yeah. I remember Duchamp being another one that we really focused on that stuck with me in a big way, and that dumb urinal, just like, wow, such a statement, you know. And I think we're kind of past that moment of like questioning what is art in the same way that he was doing in that moment. But the way that opens the door to people being able to make things now is like, I really appreciate that urinal. I think what you're just saying there is really interesting because I say that about being past art can be anything, but that's like it within the very esoteric conversation of the capital A art world.
Right.
I'm still going to museums with my dad and making a case for something being art that he cannot and ultimately will not get behind as art.
Right.
And I do love those conversations. They're some of the best conversations I've ever had in a museum context. Like I went, and I'm skipping ahead for a second, but there was this Rachel Whiteread show at the Nasher Sculpture Center when I worked there in Dallas. And I love her work. I love her work. It really knocks me on my ass. And I had seen some of her sculptures, but I hadn't seen her drawings. And there were a bunch of drawings in that show where she's using whiteout to make the lines, which connects so beautifully to the way she's thinking about like that kind of in between space, you know, and the voids in between things. And I'm not using the right words for how she talks about it, but at any rate, I was there with my roommate, and she got really upset about the whiteout. She was like, "This is not impressive. This is not art. Why are we looking at somebody playing with whiteout?" And I was like, "This is amazing. What are you talking about?" And we just had this great back and forth about it. It's not like I changed her mind, but like I tried to walk her through the connection to her sculptures. Negative space, that's the phrase that I was looking for with Rachel Whiteread. Not void, negative space. So yeah, I like those a lot. And you know, I was in public art for so long, and there's like that's a big part of how you kind of interact with people in that space. It's
You just can't be held back. You're just like,
You know what?
and then, hey,
It's all
let me
connected.
tell you about the show we're doing next month at Sheet Cake.
it's all connected.
I know, that's what I like about this, and also like there's a part of me also that's just like, man, just let that be the conversation, you know, like let it sort of meander.
Well, I also hate to mess up your narrative timeline.
I know, and then part of me is like, well, damn, Hamlet, should you really be doing this narrative timeline thing? Okay, so
Do we still have a couple minutes?
we do. You got something on your list that you want to tell me about?
Well, I was just going to timestamp us back to 2007 and say, you know, I appreciate David McCarthy and his role in my time at Rhodes, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but your class with the gallery management class is probably one of the like bigger experiences for me that lives like alive in this moment in time.
Because it's literally in the description of the class, it says art history major, blah, 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 studio major, or Lauren Kennedy. Like the class like could not, I mean, of all of the students that I've ever had in that class, like never has there been one in there that where the student was as serious about it as I was, or maybe a little bit more. And so there's this thing where, of course, when I would go to that class, there was a part of me that was like, Lauren's just like a little whippersnapper, she doesn't know anything. But then there was another part of me that was like, she knows more than you, Hamlet, and she's much more driven. And so, like, for me, one of the things, just like with Joel and Laura Ann Daly and Donna Smith, all those people and Alex Carter, Jesus,
Oh, yeah.
all those people, like I've told them all this, that they are the ones that make teachers bring their A game. Like in the same way that we want to push you to bring your A game.
Yeah.
You, in that cohort particularly, were such a strong group of students, and I couldn't, use my art teacher magic 8-ball and say one of the 20 things that I normally say during a critique. It really had to be this kind of complicated thing. Not to derail you again, but I'm super curious. So what was it about that class, aside from it literally being made for you?
It kind of was. I think because I missed out on that contemporary art history class with David, that was my biggest dose of talking about contemporary art in college. And so I think in the same way that David opened up this portal in the modern art history class, man, Hamlet, you opened up like several portals for me that I just hadn't been down yet. And I don't know if I had ever really been in a commercial gallery until you took us to those places in college. But yeah, I mean, we just we chewed on all of these really big ideas and these weird and ambitious projects, and art took on a whole nother life for me because of that class. And I've always loved the way that you talk about art, and there's just like an openness, I think, to the way you talk about it, where you made space for me coming in and having these really hard reactions to that Pimpolati wrist video, and very clearly you were like, you're wrong about this particular video, but you also let me go on my rant about it. And then I come to figure out that I was wrong years later. But it was like that whole experience was very, very big for me. And I think it really set the stage for how I engage with contemporary art in a lot of ways now.
And that's really sweet for you to say that, and it feels good to hear it. As the teacher at Rhodes, one of the things that I was always amazed by was how brilliant the students were. And so, I remember when, I think Colorado, they had their vote, and they legalized gay marriage and recreational marijuana use at the same time. And I remember I was at, it was in drawing class, and we were hanging out, we were drawing, and it was one of the days where I was drawing with the students, and I said, man, what do you guys think about that, And then they started talking, and then I was talking, and they were talking, and then at some point one of them was like, wait a minute, you're the teacher. And I was like, I know, but I don't know what happens to a society when you legalize marijuana, or I don't know where this fits into the world, and you are telling me about it, And so in the same way that, you were talking about opening the space for the conversation, that was one of the real treats of working at Rhodes, was that you guys were so invested in learning. Like all of the, I can't think of very many students where I was like, oh my God, they're just a dud. But the students really were
voracious sponges.
Yeah, but also one of the things I've noticed about teaching at U of M, and we may have already talked about this, but it's when I say, well, what do y'all think about this? The students will just be like, what? In part because, and this is something that I've read, I'm not totally sure if I can cite it, but I think the students at Rhodes from a very early age were taught that the thing that they had to say was valuable. And the students that I've encountered, the majority, not all, but the majority of the students at the University of Memphis, that's kind of my job, is to help them say, well, this is what I think. And so I've definitely noticed that, and it's definitely a bigger push of my energy in teaching is trying to make that space and to try and also be curious and to wonder. But that was something that I didn't have to do at Rhodes. It was just like, it's there. I mean, they are going to tell you what they think. And it's such a wonderful environment. I hope that it's still that way. But I think for me, that was such a really great class because really I would just have very little to start with. And you guys were the ones that would have the questions, or when we would go to galleries, none of you really were starstruck or intimidated in any way. You would ask those questions of the dealers and of the curators in a way that I did not have to do any of that heavy lifting, which was such a pleasure.
Yeah.
Now, thinking about you at that stage, I mean, I'm super curious. I mean, in the same way that I've said this before, like I know you as a teacher, but this maybe wasn't something that I was thinking of at the time. But what were you thinking in terms of your ambitions of timestamp, whatever year that was, 21-year-old Lauren?
Timestamp 2008. I think I just thought that museums were the way to go. I think I still didn't understand all of the different ways that you can show up and participate in the art world. Just because I hadn't, I had done the internship at Sotheby's, and I did find that truly fascinating. And I'd done a small internship with a nonprofit in Dallas, an arts nonprofit. But I think I felt like museums were where I needed to. I know I felt museums were where I needed to be. And I think at that point, I still kind of had this idea that maybe I could be like a museum curator. Mm-hmm. And then, I graduate and I'm working at the bookstore and I'm having this big rowdy golden time. And then I get this job at the Nasher Sculpture Center, but it's in the membership department. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like a database junkie for them. And it was very unsexy, except for when there were like member parties, and occasionally I would kind of, because I think the curatorial staff knew that I was a big art history nerd. I got to meet a couple of the artists, and I have had a bad habit of not just like sticking to one thing and always having like take on a little bit more than I can chew. Mm-hmm. And so I was also doing this kind of side project with some people in Dallas where we were interviewing artists about shows going on in the area. And so I kind of pushed my way in with the curatorial team and got to interview some of the artists like Martin Creed when they came to the museum. And that was really, that was the sexy stuff for me at that point. But it was like the first 6 months, I think, that I was there, I was just high on life because I would walk in to this gorgeous Renzo Piano building with all of this really important and exquisite sculpture. And there, this James Turrell piece in the back that I would just like sometimes go sit in and cry because my boyfriend had just dumped me. And this Alexander Calder bird sculpture that is very dear to my heart, and a great Richard Serra too, rest in peace to him. And so I was just kind of high on all of that. And then about 6 months in, I realized that like almost nobody outside of the curatorial department had an art degree, and that the event rental people were kind of more powerful than the curatorial team. And that, just like the realities of understanding this is just like a business, and there are people making decisions that are about like rich people's parties and not about the like safety of art objects. And the people were not there because of the reasons that I was there. And it's not to bash the Nasher because it's a great institution. And it's just the reality of an art history student, like understanding how a museum operates. And I found that kind of deflating at the time. And now, I've had leadership experience and had people like me at that age working for me and not having a single fucking clue about what it takes to just like operate a business. And, you know, so I get how irritating I must have been to some of the people that I worked for at the time. But you know, I did love being there, and I got to see some really great shows. Got to meet some really cool people, and yeah, I actually just got to take my daughter there a couple weeks ago, which was a very special experience for me.
All right, let's go back in time.
Okay.
We're gonna scoot back a little bit, and
Okay.
so we were talking about Coda,
Yeah.
and then you mentioned that you organized a show with Joel. If I remember right, that was after he graduated when he was in India, and then were you still in school then?
Yeah, so he graduated a year ahead of me.
Okay.
So that was my senior year, end of my senior year. Or maybe it was even the summer after I graduated,
Right.
before he came back.
Okay, that sounds right. Because I remember there's a rule that I refer to as the Lauren Kennedy Vita Shell rule, which is that you never hang a show without the artist present because you were in that gallery management class. Now, and then of course you also organized these other shows with other people or had a hand in lots of other things. And so I'm curious, what were some other observations that you had in terms of thinking about the city itself? I know that was sort of a strange tangent to get to that place and mention the Lauren Kennedy rule, but like, what do you remember about the city in the late aughts?
You know, I didn't explore Memphis until I came back from that study abroad semester. So spring of my junior year and then my senior year, I would say, is when I actually like spent more time beyond the gates. And I think that's, you know, being sheltered, and it can be, you can let that be a very isolating experience within the city, if you let it be. But yeah, I remember when I started to go out, like I remember finding Otherlands for the first time and like going to work out of Otherlands, and it's the same experience taking your laptop into Otherlands as it was in 2007 and 2008. I remember there being like more cool stuff happening around martial arts. Like that was a space that was more active, I feel like, than it is now. And like Sasha Barr, I remember, did a really cool big print show at Martial Arts at some point around then. There were a couple of more galleries, I think, than there are now that are not with us anymore. I remember feeling like, oh, this place is kind of funky. And my love for Memphis really grew that last year and a half being at Rhodes. I did an internship at Ballet Memphis and met a group of people who were not attached to the college, and that my like relationships in the city kind of spread out from that. And I moved back to Dallas, and I would just talk about Memphis to people a lot, because I think, in a way that still feels kind of true today, but just felt like people were doing a lot of these interesting projects and making stuff and running around and sharing it with each other, and it all just felt new and kind of big for me, like stepping out of the campus and finding all of that.
Yeah, because I mean, you were saying that. I mean, I think your progression is totally a normal one. I think most freshmen and sophomores don't have a huge amount of experience outside of the school, especially in terms of thinking about like the specialized world of art. And then you were talking about when you came back from Paris, you remember the project that we had at Martial Arts. I remember that one. Were there other things that stuck out to you in terms of the art or the artists or the atmosphere in the city of those late aughts?
I'm going to make you uncomfortable again, but material was a big part of the experience of the art scene at that time. which, and the whole idea that you lived in this cool 2-story building and you had your studio on the first floor and then you just carved out a section for art was just very cool and intriguing for me. And I remember going to those openings and being there with a crowd of people, and every time something opened, I feel like I was there for it. There was also a collective at that point that I don't remember the name of. Maybe it started with like an O or something. But they did some pop-up stuff down the street on Broad. This was like before anybody tried to call Broad Avenue an arts district.
Was it Odessa?
Yes, it was Odessa. Yeah. And then I don't know if they were the folks behind that space on Roselle too, but
that was the Roselle Artist Guild.
Yeah,
that was
Shay Colburn and Lauren Ray Holterman. Birdcap, yeah. Doing space. Like I went to a rave with this guy from CBU at the Roselle studio, and somebody stole my coat. I remember that. Yeah, so there was like this very kind of organic scene happening of people just organizing shit. And Memphis is a place that to me always stays hungry for something cool and interesting. And so people would put these things out. And I remember there being people turning up at all of this stuff,
And then do you remember, like you were talking about the spaces, do you remember any particular artists?
Well, I remember going to see a show of Twins' work at a gallery, Nicole something. Does that ring a bell?
Perry Nicole?
Perry Nicole.
Okay.
Yep. And that space by the Central Library is where they used to be. I remember seeing that show there. I remember the Nia Art Collective was still kind of doing their thing. I remember meeting Frank Robinson around then, and like meeting him and Vitus Shell both. Like I still kind of stay in touch with them, and I know I keep doing it, but like I got to buy a piece from Vitus Shell and Frank Robinson for the airport collection that I put together, which felt really good. But back to our 2008 timestamp.
But also, I mean, full disclosure, this is also one of the things that really delights me in these. There's my alarm that tells us it's time to stop. But that's one of the things that really delights me in these interviews is that, and especially thinking about my conversation with Frederick, how much these connections cycle, but not necessarily cycle, but Venn diagram over in the future and in the past and in the present. And to me, that's something that I really like about doing these. But also one of the things that I really like about Memphis, and I love that thing that you said about how Memphis is hungry. That's a really great thing. Look, if this was a This American Life, we would have to use that.
Yes.
But also thinking about stuff that, if you're up for doing this again, when I start doing this again, I mean, for sure, I want to talk a little bit more about Coda, because I know that was super, super important throughout. And then also, for sure, want to think about these, that shift, maybe not necessarily a shift in the relationship, but like how you working with Joel on that show, or you working with Vitus in that capacity. I think we're hopefully rich ones and ones that we would be able to mine maybe a little bit more later.
Yeah.
And then of course all the other stuff, and of course South Fork in terms of thinking about that. And so I want to make sure that we do that. And this is in part me talking to you, but this is also me talking to me.
Okay.
So that, because when I do these interviews, I always listen to the one before that.
Yeah.
So that I'm like, okay, we talked about this, we didn't talk about this. Okay, so this is a note to self, but also a note to you.
Yes. And we'll talk about the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum.
Great. And that was the first of what I hope are many interviews with the great Lauren Kennedy. We only got to a tiny little spot in what I hope is a wonderful and long life for Lauren, and one of the things I really look forward to with this project is interviewing people again and again over time and at different stages in their lives. And so we'll record another one with Lauren, hopefully sometime very soon. That interview was recorded on April 10th, 2024. Please join us next week when we will have another interview. Until then, thank you so much for listening.